scheme. So with this in mind, I will start by giving the floor to Professor Cyrus Mehta. He has been a distinguished professor of law at Brooklyn School, where he teaches immigration and work. He is also the founder and managing partner of Cyrus D. Mehta PLLC. He has also been a former chairman of the board of trustees of the American Immigration Council, and he pursued his studies both in Cambridge University and in San Javier College in Bombay. Let me request you a special favor. I know that Professor Mehta is quite busy for today, so he will give his presentation and we will open the floor for all the VIPs, including the panelists, so that they can interact with Professor Mehta in order for him to leave if he doesn't have the opportunity to be with us for the rest of the session. So good morning, Professor Mehta. It is a big pleasure for me being the chair and giving you the floor.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be part of this forum, and I'm going to be presenting on the U.S. Immigration policies under President Trump. You've already given an introduction on how Trump has become a rock star with regards to implementing restrictionist immigration policies. And I will provide more of a background so that we can then open up discussion on this. America has been a nation of immigrants. That's how it has always been known. Since Trump's election, he has changed the way the United States perceives immigrants. His administration views immigrants as generally hostile towards the interests of Americans. And he started off on that as part of his election platform, that you have Mexicans coming into the US. If people come in an undocumented capacity, they're criminals and rapists. That's how he started his election campaign. And then he also said that immigrants who come to the US and take up jobs are detrimental to the interests of Americans as part of his America First policy. Ever since Trump has come in, it's been pretty unfortunate for immigrants and for immigration advocates like us. The good news is that Trump does not represent most of the United States. As you know, he kind of became president through an electoral college victory. So he didn't get the majority of votes in the US. It's not like most US people are hostile towards immigrants, but his policies have demonstrated this hostility towards immigrants. When he took office, he used a provision, Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And this is a pretty broad provision. It allows the president to bar any groups of foreign nationals if they're detrimental to the interests of the US. It was enacted sometime in 1952, and it has been used in a very kind of narrow way by other presidents. And it's basically been used as part of diplomacy to basically try to entice foreign countries to cooperate on certain policies or to retaliate against them. And it was used to retaliate against officials of certain countries. But what Trump did was he used 212F to totally reorder immigration law. And immigration law is passed by the US Congress under the separation of powers doctrine. And 212F gives the president leeway to ban foreign nationals if they are detrimental to the interests. And he used this very broadly to impose what we now know as the Muslim ban. and it banned at least 150 million or more from countries like Iran, Sudan, Libya, and other countries with mostly Muslim populations. And so this was his first experiment with using 212F to impose a wholesale and broad ban on immigrants that were disfavored by his administration. Unfortunately, 2 years later, the Supreme Court in Trump versus Hawaii upheld that ban on the grounds that 212F gives broad power to the president, and the courts have to defer to the president's judgment with regards to foreign policy. Now, he has then continued, after he got this victory, to use this 212F to impose other bans that had more of a domestic flavor. So for example, in 2018, he implemented a ban for people who were coming into the US who didn't have health insurance. Now, this was purely domestic. It had nothing to do with retaliating against countries that were not cooperating. This was purely a domestic issue. And so this was challenged in the courts. And the Ninth Circuit, it's not yet gone to the Supreme Court, but at least the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said that the president can't use 212F to reorder immigration law. There's already a statute that Congress has enacted that contradicts the president's proclamation with regards to health insurance. It violates the separation of powers doctrine. So there have been some kind of victories with regards to Trump's use of his broad power under Section 212F. But then in 2020, we then had the coronavirus that just crept on us and has caught everybody by surprise. But sure enough, Trump has weaponized the coronavirus to continue his restrictionist policies on immigration. And he has imposed one ban and another on different countries. He imposed a ban on the whole Schengen region. He imposed a ban on China, a ban on Brazil. And so those were still kind of limited and they were based on COVID. But then in April, he imposed a ban on mostly all green card processing at overseas consulates. So these are people who waited to come in as green card holders, as legitimate immigrants. And now most of them have been banned. There are exceptions, spouses of US citizens, minor children, but generally speaking, people who were legally waiting in the line to come in as legal immigrants, including parents of American citizens, have now been banned under that proclamation. And then in June, Trump issued another proclamation on non-immigrant visas. These are vital work visas, like the H-1 visa, the L intra-company transferee visa. And he imposed a ban on that under the ground that American workers have to be protected because of the high unemployment rate as a result of the COVID-19 infection. So this is where we stand. And yeah, and then he has also kind of used COVID to, lock down on asylum processes. So for example, there's now a proposed rule saying that if an asylum seeker has crossed or come from countries that are hotspots, and it's not just COVID, but any kind of, infectious diseases, then you can also kind of deny the ability of that person to apply for asylum in the United States. And now just imagine the US has been the beacon of hope and liberty to the world's persecuted since its inception. The Statue of Liberty outside New York Harbor, and my office is just there. I can see the Statue of Liberty when I come out of my building. It represents this whole beautiful notion of welcoming people who have been persecuted. But Trump has just changed this completely around and used COVID as a basis to get away with it for the time being. Now, the topic of this panel is how does this impact migration from Mexico and India? I can speak briefly about India first, and then I'll also give my thoughts on Mexico. So with respect to India, the H-1B visa is used widely in India. Most people who use the H-1 visa are Indian nationals. They're skilled workers, they're professionals, and they're in the pipeline for the green card. And they've been caught in huge backlogs because of a defect in the way the supply of visas are distributed every year. And as a result of which, Indians are in decades-long backlogs. And they have to survive in the US on the H-1B visa. And now Trump has imposed a ban on H-1B visa holders who were outside the United States at the time of the ban. So a lot of people have been impacted as a result. Family members, you know, Indians sponsor their parents. They are US citizens. They want to sponsor parents and brothers and sisters. They have also been impacted. With regards to Mexico, same thing. You know, these bans impact Mexicans, but there are other issues with Mexico. When people try to cross into the US through Mexico and apply for asylum, they've been impacted terribly. And so where do we stand now? We are at this interesting juncture where the elections are going to be held in November. And the question is, what's going to happen? Of course, if Trump gets defeated, the good thing is that these are all executive actions. Congress has not passed any law. And that's the whole reason why Trump was able to get away. He couldn't do these things in Congress, and he uses executive authority broadly under Section 212F to impose these bans under the guise of protecting America's national security, and now more recently, protecting American jobs under COVID. And basically, that's where we are at. And if Trump loses, then you know, it will all get changed. So I think I'm going to stop here at this point of time and allow my co-panelists to speak or open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much. It is so interesting that you have already mentioned the case of Mexico in a comparative perspective with the rest, but particularly with the case of India, which is exactly the focus of today's conversation. So the floor is open to the rest of the panelists. If someone would like to jump in, please.
Okay, I take the word. So
welcome,
thank you,
Elizabeth.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel on migration after COVID-19. I'm very glad to share this panel with my colleagues and with all the people who are joining us today. I'm going to concentrate my intervention on a segment of migration that has been increasing here in Mexico during the last 15 years. I mean the migration from Mexico to the United States. That is a skill and high skill migration. And it has increased not just in terms of its volume, but also in terms of its relevance due to its contribution to the US economy. And as Dr. Cyrus Mehta has already mentioned, there has been a significant impact in terms of the issuance of some specific kind of visa, such as the H-1B that he already mentioned. But before concentrating on skill and high skill migration, I just want to make some remarks about what is happening right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to say that the impact of the pandemic will only be clear in its entirety in months, if not years to come. Certainly, it will be those in low-income jobs in the low-skill service sector and those with a low level of qualifications, educational qualifications, that will suffer the most from the consequences of this pandemic. But we have also to recognize that skill and high skill migration are also being affected by all these new measures and policies that the Trump administration has been taking during the last months because of the pandemic, or at least they say that these measures are a consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout history, we know that migration has always been a very controversial policy and social topic, but it is true that when we face times of fear, times of insecurity, it is a topic that becomes even more controversial. And unfortunately, emergencies sometimes justify policy measures that will normally seem too harsh or rushed in normal times.
Excuse me. Do you have a specific question to ask to Professor Mehta, because he needs to leave the session, and we will go back to the rest of the speakers, please. Elizabeth, wrap up.
I think some problem is there in the audio. Is it over, Dr. Elizabeth?
Okay, I think I do not have any problem with my audio. I was just waiting for the rest of the audience if they have specific questions for Dr. Cyrus Mehta.
I do have a question, a quick question to Professor Mehta. Considering that America is just about to face an election, which I consider this is a historical one, what do you foresee in terms of what would happen if Biden wins regarding the disimplementation of all these measures that have been imposed by Donald Trump? That this cannot be done automatically, especially because we will be still facing the challenges of COVID-19.
Yeah, this is a good question, but as I said in my concluding remarks, that all these are executive actions. They are not laws passed by Congress. So they would be very easy to undo by the next president. So for example, if Biden becomes president, he has actually vowed to revoke all these executive actions. Now, you do raise a good point that if the COVID pandemic continues to rage and the American people, feel threatened that immigrants are taking their jobs, even a more immigrant-friendly administration, such as Biden's, might not, reverse everything right away. So I don't think it's just going to be euphoria and on day one everything will be rescinded. But at least now, in terms of the promises that are made and the way Biden is running his election campaign, it looks pretty optimistic that many of these, the most awful draconian executive actions, these travel bans, will hopefully get rescinded. There are other restrictions that have been passed through administrative rules. Even those are easier to undo than congressional acts. Unfortunately, there aren't too many congressional laws. So I think that's my response. And I'd be happy to take other questions. And I'm sorry if Professor Salamanca was interrupted here. All I would like to interject, yes, is that I agree that from Mexico too, there's a lot of high-skilled immigration, and the relationship that Mexico has with the US is also based on what was known as the North America Free Trade Agreement, which Trump has changed to the US, Mexico, and Canada agreement. And there are visas that emanate from that agreement too. So Mexicans can come in on the TN visa and they come in as professionals. So there is a lot of, interesting high-skilled immigration. Unfortunately, Trump's proclamations have not impacted that Mexican TN visa. And, Elizabeth, you might want to kind of talk more about that, but I didn't want to interrupt you. And I'm sorry if you got interrupted, but if there are any further questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this point.
I have a question for you, Dr. Mehta. What's your general perception about Trump policies and measures regarding the family reunification visas as compared to these skill and high skill non-immigrant and immigrant applications? Do you consider that in general the Trump administration is more focused on avoiding family reunification than skill migration, or do you consider that the kind of measures that his administration is taking are pretty similar in that sense?
Okay, just let me jump in. The time is running so quickly, and I would like Professor Mehta to answer this question, and then I need to give the floor to the rest. We still have 5 panelists, and hopefully
Absolutely.
Professor Mehta will be able to be with us a longer time in order for we open the floor once the 5th others will have already presented their points of view. Okay, please, Professor Mehta.
So I just want to kind of make clear that I'm not a PhD, I'm not a doctor, I'm a practicing lawyer. So don't call me Dr. Mehta. I don't have a PhD. I'm not in such distinguished company as my panelists. I am a adjunct professor at Brooklyn Law School, but I'm a practicing lawyer, and my bread and butter is practicing law. And then of course I also have academic interests. But to answer your questions, Elizabeth, we thought that Trump was against undocumented immigrants and family immigration, and which he pejoratively referred to as chain migration, because you sponsor one family member, then that family member becomes a citizen and then sponsors others, although it takes decades for this chain to really work. And by the way, even Trump's family has practiced chain migration through his wife, who then sponsored her parents. So we thought that that was where Trump's focus was, but it seems like he's also attacked skilled immigration, family immigration. There seems to be a general hostility. He's got in his administration a senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, who is very influential. Stephen Miller is a xenophobe, and he came from xenophobic roots. He was with think tanks that opposed immigration policy, and these people have been given more credibility and respectability under the Trump administration, when they were formerly pariahs in other administrations, even in Republican administrations prior to this. So unfortunately, I think there is this general hostility, and Trump, in order to win, and he wants to win at any cost, wants to play to his base, this narrow base in these Midwestern states. He wants to get that electoral college advantage again. And when he does something harsh on immigration, then it kind of, riles up his base. He feels that he becomes more popular among his base. And so whenever he's down or there's some scandal or whatever, he tries to kind of, do something pretty draconian with immigration. And all this is kind of pretty sad. I'm talking about it with a straight face, but it's sad, and I really hope we can kind of get out of this nightmare. But if not, then there are millions of immigrants in the United States that still need to be protected, and we will have to play defense. And fortunately, we will continue to sue Trump in the courts of law, and hopefully, the courts will uphold the law, and that's our vision if Trump wins. But if Trump does not, then we have a more optimistic outlook on immigration.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mehta. It's been an interesting and quite informative presentation. You have the combination of being an activist, an advocate, and also you have your teaching duties. So congratulations.